It started with an email. A woman named Evelyn Moore, frantic and desperate, begging me to investigate Blackwood Manor. Not for ghosts or hauntings, but for something worse, something alive. People disappear there, she wrote. I have proof, but I need help. As a private investigator, I've handled my share of strange cases, but this one felt different. Still, the money was good, and I was curious. The drive to Blackwood Manor was suffocating, the road winding through thick skeletal trees. The mansion loomed as I approached, its windows like empty sockets. Something about it felt unnatural, as if the land itself rejected it. Evelyn was waiting on the porch, pacing. She was in her 40s, but her sunken eyes and nervous energy aged her decades more. I thought you wouldn't come, she said, barely meeting my gaze. I tried to warn others before, but no one listens. Tell me everything, I said. Inside, the house smelled of dust and something foul. Evelyn led me to a study where she spread out a pile of old photographs on a wooden desk. These are the missing people. All of them last seen near Blackwood Manor. No bodies, no signs of struggle. They just vanish. I picked up a photograph, grainy, black and white. A woman and a child staring at the camera. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows, was something else. A figure, too tall, too thin, watching. That's from 1924, Evelyn said. They disappeared 2 days after it was taken. A chill crawled up my spine. You said you had proof. She hesitated, then pulled a cassette tape from her bag. This was recorded 2 nights ago. I left a voice recorder running in the basement. Listen. I found an old cassette player on a shelf and pressed play. At first, static, then a faint rustling, a whisper indistinct, but insidious. Then, suddenly a voice, breathless and broken. Help me, it sees me, it's in the walls. The tape cut off. I looked at Evelyn. Who was that? A journalist, she said. He came here last week. That's the last thing anyone heard from him. Something cold twisted in my stomach. Show me the basement. Evelyn led me down the creaking stairs. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with damp rot. My flashlight flickered as I swept it across the room. Old furniture, dust-covered crates, and then deep scratches marred the stone walls, like something had clawed at them in desperation. There's something else, Evelyn whispered. Behind this shelf, we pushed aside an old bookcase, revealing a hidden door, its frame lined with deep gouges. Evelyn handed me a crowbar, and I pried it open. A passage stretched beyond, black as a starless night. A smell hit me, not just decay, but something worse, something sickly sweet, something alive. Then, the sound, a clicking, rhythmic, and deliberate. We weren't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, twisted, its limbs unnaturally long, its face obscured by a tangle of wiry hair. It moved without sound, its head tilting in a grotesque imitation of curiosity. Evelyn let out a strangled sob. I reached for my gun. The thing grinned. Then the lights went out. The door behind us slammed shut. The air turned icy. I could hear Evelyn's breath, shallow and terrified. And then, the whispers began. They came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. Dozens of voices, overlapping, urgent, desperate. Run! A force slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs. I hit the ground hard, my flashlight skittering away. In the dim glow, I saw Evelyn frozen in place, her eyes locked on the thing looming over us. It was closer now, its face finally visible. But it wasn't a face at all. It was hollow. Empty sockets where eyes should be. A mouth stretched into something that wasn't a smile, but a gaping wound. The whispers turned to laughter. I grabbed Evelyn's arm. We have to go. We bolted toward the passage, blindly feeling our way forward. The whispers grew louder, the walls trembling. Something clawed at my back, icy fingers brushing my neck. I bit down a scream. Then, suddenly, a door. Heavy, metal. I slammed into it, yanking the handle. Locked. Behind us, the whispers stopped. Silence. Absolute. Terrifying. Then, a voice. One voice. Close. You belong here now. I spun, but the thing was gone. Only darkness remained. And then, the clicking started again. Closer this time. I pounded on the door. Help! A sound metal groaning. A latch shifting. The door flew open, and we tumbled through, gasping. Light. Fresh air. We were in the forest behind the manor, the twisted trees looming around us. I turned back just in time to see the door slam shut on its own. And then, just like that, it was gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there at all. Evelyn was trembling. You believe me now? I nodded, my hands still shaking. We need to go. Now. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gas. Gravel spraying behind us as we tore down the narrow road away from the manor. Evelyn sat rigid in the passenger seat, her knuckles white as she clutched her bag. It let us go, she whispered. What? It let us go, she repeated. It could have kept us there, but it wanted us to leave. I swallowed hard. She was right. It had played with us, let us glimpse its presence. It wanted us to spread the fear, to let others know it was watching. When we reached town, I pulled into the nearest diner. The neon sign flickered above us, a welcoming glow in the night. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee offered a fragile sense of safety. We took a booth in the far corner, our backs to the wall. Evelyn pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. The journalist, she murmured. His name was David. I tried calling him after he disappeared. The voicemail, it wasn't his voice. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? She played a recording. Static filled the first few seconds. Then a whisper crawled through the speaker. Still here, still waiting. The voice was layered, distorted, as if multiple mouths spoke at once. I exhaled sharply. We need to destroy that place. Evelyn looked up, eyes filled with exhaustion and determination. How? That thing isn't just inside the house, it is the house. I drummed my fingers against the table, my mind racing. Then we trap it. We seal whatever passage it uses to reach outside. If we can contain it, maybe we can stop it. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. We'd need to go back. Everything in me screamed against it, but she was right. If we ran, others would take our place. More people would vanish. It had to end. We left before dawn, the road back to Blackwood Manor, a winding stretch of darkness. The house stood unchanged, a monument of silent malevolence. No hesitation, I muttered. We get in, seal the passage, and get out. We entered cautiously, the air thicker than before, charged with unseen energy. The house was waiting for us. Down in the basement, the passage was still there, gaping like a wound in the wall. The clicking started immediately. It knows we're back, Evelyn whispered. I pulled a canister of gasoline from my bag. Then let's make this quick. We spread the gasoline along the walls, across the passage, over every surface. The whispering rose to a frenzy, urgent and furious. Then came the laughter, mocking, hungry. Evelyn struck the match. Flames roared to life, racing through the basement like a living thing. The walls trembled, the entire house groaning in protest. The whispers turned to screams. We ran. The fire spread unnaturally fast, licking up the walls, consuming the wood and stone like a beast unchained. Outside, we turned just in time to see the windows explode, black smoke billowing into the sky. Then, the house shuddered and sank, as if something beneath had finally pulled it down into the earth. We stood there, panting, watching as the remains of Blackwood Manor disappeared into nothingness. Evelyn turned to me, her face illuminated by the dying embers. Is it gone? I wanted to believe it, but deep in the forest, where the twisted trees swayed in an unnatural rhythm, I swore I heard it one last time. A whisper, "See you soon." And then, silence. The house had always been quiet at night, but tonight, it felt different. The silence was thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel sat on his bed, his phone screen casting a dim glow over his hands. It was late, and his mother was downstairs, probably cleaning up after dinner. His father was working the night shift, leaving just the two of them in the house. Or so he thought. "Daniel, come to the kitchen, sweetheart." His mother's voice drifted up from downstairs, clear and warm. He sighed, locking his phone and stretching his arms. He wasn't hungry, but maybe she needed help with something. As he stood up, he heard something else. A voice identical to the first whispered from his mother's bedroom, just a few feet down the hall. "Don't go there." I heard it too. Daniel's heart stilled. His breath caught in his throat. He turned his head slowly toward the darkened doorway at the end of the hall. The air suddenly felt colder, the kind of cold that seeped into his bones. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Mom?" he called, barely above a whisper. Silence. Then the voice from the kitchen came again, but it was different now. Sharper, impatient. "Daniel, come here, right now." Something about it was wrong. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Daniel's skin prickled. His mother never spoke to him like that. His gaze flickered back to the slightly open door of her bedroom. A faint shadow shifted underneath the doorframe. His mother, if it really was her, was inside. Something was in the kitchen. Daniel took a hesitant step toward the bedroom, his breathing shallow. "Mom?" His voice cracked. The door creaked open a little more. The room was dark except for the soft moonlight filtering through the curtains. His mother stood there, half hidden by shadows, her face barely visible. Didn't know where to go. He had never been more terrified in his life. "Daniel," the voice from the kitchen snapped, louder now. A shadow flickered at the bottom of the stairs. He swallowed hard. Something was standing in the kitchen doorway. It was too tall, much too tall. Its head almost scraped the ceiling, its arms hanging at unnatural angles. It was shaped like a person, but wrong. The figure stood completely still, but Daniel could feel its attention locked onto him. Then it moved. A single, slow step forward. The floor creaked under its weight. Daniel stumbled back, his body screaming at him to run. He slammed his mother's bedroom door shut behind him, heart pounding against his ribs. "Lock it," his mother whispered urgently. His hands fumbled with the lock, his fingers slick with sweat. Just as he clicked it into place, scratch. Long, deliberate scratches ran down the outside of the door. Daniel backed away, his breath coming in short gasps. His mother clutched his wrist tightly, her grip cold as ice. "They can't get in." "Not yet," she whispered. "What do you mean?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice steady. She shushed him, tilting her head slightly as if listening. Silence. Then, click. The door unlocked. Daniel's stomach dropped. He hadn't touched the lock. His mother hadn't moved. The handle twisted. The door creaked open just an inch, revealing the pitch-black hallway beyond. Nothing stood there, but the kitchen light had gone out. A darkness deeper than the night seemed to spread through the house, swallowing the weak glow of the moonlight. Then, from just beyond the doorway, the voice whispered again. "Daniel, come here, sweetheart." His blood turned to ice. The voice was closer now, right outside the door. His mother's grip on his wrist tightened. "Don't move," she breathed. Daniel didn't. The darkness in the hallway shifted, thick and unnatural. The shadowy figure outside the door no longer looked human. It crouched, peering into the slight opening, its long fingers pressing against the doorframe. The dim light from his mother's window barely illuminated its form, but he could see just enough. Its face, if it could even be called that, was smooth, featureless, like wet, stretched skin pulled too tight over a skull. No eyes, no mouth, just an empty, soulless void where a face should be. But it spoke, just like his mother. "Daniel, let me in." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, his breath coming in rapid bursts. "Don't listen," his mother whispered, pulling him away from the door. "It can mimic voices, but it's not human." He nodded, his hands trembling. The thing outside let out a guttural clicking sound, low and unnatural. The door creaked again, just barely ajar. Then, slam! The entire door shook violently as something massive crashed against it. Daniel yelped, stumbling backward. His mother held him close, her body trembling. The scratching started again, slow, patient. Then, a new sound. A whisper, but not just one. Dozens. Whispers slithered through the crack in the door, overlapping in hushed, inhuman tones. Some sounded like his mother, some like his father, others she didn't recognize at all. His chest tightened. A single, impossibly long finger slid through the crack of the door. It was pale and thin, its nail yellowed and jagged. It wiggled slightly, feeling around. Daniel bit down on his lip to stop himself from screaming. His mother grabbed his shoulders. "We have to move," she whispered urgently. "But where?" She pointed to the window. Daniel's stomach churned. Outside, the yard was empty, just the wind rustling through the trees. But what if there was something out there too? His mother didn't give him a choice. She grabbed his hand and yanked him toward the window just as another deafening bang rattled the door. The whispers turned into hissing, a chorus of overlapping, angry voices. The finger was gone. The whispers had stopped. But he knew whatever was out there was still waiting. And it wasn't done with him yet. Daniel's breath hitched as his mother yanked him toward the window. The chill of the night seeped through the glass, but it was nothing compared to the ice in his veins. Another bang rattled the door, shaking the walls. The thing outside was getting angry. "We have to go," his mother whispered, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Now, Daniel hesitated. The backyard stretched into the dark woods beyond, a void of swaying trees and rustling leaves. It was the unknown. But the thing outside the door, he knew it was real. A sickening creak echoed behind him. He turned his head. The door was opening. It didn't slam this time. It didn't burst open in rage. It opened slowly, deliberately, as if whatever was on the other side wanted him to see it. The shadows slithered, shifting unnaturally. And then, a face. Or at least something that had stolen the shape of a face. It was his mother's. Her same warm eyes, her same soft smile, but wrong. The eyes were too wide. The smile stretched too far. "Daniel," it cooed. "It's okay. You can come with me now." Daniel couldn't breathe. His muscles locked. The thing tilted its head as if it was confused by his fear. Then its mouth snapped open, unhinged like a snake. It lurched forward. His mother yanked him backward. "Move!" He stumbled but forced himself toward the window. His mother shoved it open, and the cool night air hit him in a rush. The thing in the doorway let out a piercing shriek, a sound like metal scraping against metal, echoing through the house. Daniel didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the windowsill, his mother right behind him. The wind howled as he dangled for a second before dropping down into the backyard, the grass damp beneath his bare feet. His mother landed beside him just as something slammed against the window frame above them. Daniel looked up. The thing was there, leaning halfway out of the window. Its arms were too long, its fingers clawing at the air. Its mouth still hung open, gaping, black, wrong. It stared at him, unblinking. Then it spoke in a voice so soft, so familiar, it made his stomach turn. "Come back inside, sweetheart. It's cold out there." Daniel grabbed his mother's hand and ran. The trees swallowed them whole as they sprinted into the forest behind their house. Twigs snapped beneath their feet. Branches whipped at Daniel's arms. But he didn't dare slow down. "Where are we going?" he gasped. "Just keep moving," his mother panted. "It doesn't like the woods. I think—" She stopped abruptly. Daniel turned to her, his chest heaving. "Mom?" Her eyes were wide, staring past him. He turned, and his stomach plummeted. Something stood between the trees. Not the thing from the house. Something else. It was tall, its limbs grotesquely thin. Its skin looked stretched too tight over its bones. And its face. Daniel's blood ran cold. It didn't have a face. A smooth, featureless void stared back at them, its head tilting slightly as if observing. Then, its mouth split open. No lips, no teeth, just a dark, cavernous maw tearing across where its face should have been. A low clicking sound echoed through the woods. Daniel took a step back. Then, The trees moved, not the wind. The trees themselves. Their trunks twisted, shifting, the branches curling toward the faceless thing. Daniel barely had time to react before his mother grabbed him and shoved him to the ground. Something whizzed past his head, a dark, twisting shape, fast and wrong. His mother screamed. Daniel scrambled to his feet. She was gone. A second ago, she had been right beside him. Now nothing. "Mom!" His voice cracked. He spun wildly. The woods stretched into endless darkness. A gust of wind whispered through the trees. And then, "Daniel, sweetheart." His stomach clenched. The voice came from ahead, his mother's voice. But something was wrong. She sounded off, distant, warped. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps. His vision swam. Then, from behind him, Daniel. His real mother's voice. Terror clenched his chest. Two voices, one ahead, one behind. Both his mother's. He took a trembling step forward, then stopped. What if he chose wrong? A low rustling sounded through the trees. The faceless thing was still there, watching, waiting. The voice in front of him called again, softer now. "Come here, honey, it's okay." The voice behind him whispered urgently. "Daniel, listen to me. You have to run. That's not me." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. The shadows deepened. The thing in the distance smiled. Not with lips, not with teeth. Then, the ground shifted beneath his feet. Toward him. And then, darkness swallowed everything. Daniel jolted awake. His room. He was in his room. Sweat drenched his clothes. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His fingers clenched the sheets, his heart still hammering against his ribs. Had it been a nightmare? Had it all been real? A soft knock at the door made him jump. "Daniel?" His mother's voice. His real mother? Or something else? He stared at the door, frozen. Then, slowly, the handle began to turn. The first time I noticed her, it was late past midnight, the kind of hour when the world feels empty, like you're the last person awake in existence. I had just finished washing the dishes, and as I wiped my hands dry, I caught a movement from the window. A glance across the alley to the neighboring house showed a woman in the upstairs window, standing completely still. She wasn't doing any, just staring directly at me. At first, I figured she was just absent-mindedly looking out into the night, lost in thought. But something about her posture was wrong. Rigid, unnatural, as if she had been placed there rather than standing of her own will. Her face was obscured by shadows, but her eyes, those I could see, wide and unblinking. They locked onto mine, and my stomach twisted with unease. I turned away, shaking it off. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Or maybe she just had a habit of staring out windows. People did weird things. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of her, motionless, watching, always watching. The thought followed me into sleep, seeping into my dreams with a quiet persistence. The next night, I checked again, and there she was. Same position, same posture, same lifeless stare. I felt my skin crawl. I waved hesitantly, half expecting her to move, to acknowledge me. She didn't. She just stood there, silent and unmoving, frozen in time. Her stillness wasn't normal. It was deliberate. I told myself it was just my imagination getting the better of me. I wasn't some paranoid lunatic's eye. Wasn't about to let a woman in a window ruin my peace of mind. But I couldn't help myself. Each night, I checked, and each night she was there, never shifting, never blinking, never changing, as if she wasn't human at all. And something in me whispered that she knew I was watching her too. By the fourth night, I had enough. I grabbed my binoculars from the shelf and hesitantly raised them to my eyes, focusing on her face. My breath caught in my throat. Her skin was palely and naturally so. Her mouth was slightly open, and her lips looked dry, almost cracked. But it was her eyes that unsettled me the most. They weren't just staring at me. They were glassy, fixed, like those of a corpse. A chill ran down my spine. There was no life behind them, no flicker of recognition, just emptiness. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. A mannequin, I thought desperately. That had to be it, some twisted joke or bizarre decoration. But deep down, I knew that was no mannequin. That was something else entirely, something that shouldn't be watching me. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I dreamed of her. In my dream, I stood frozen at my window while she moved, stepping away from her perch and into the darkness of her house. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just waited, knowing she was coming for me. A slow, deliberate march toward my door. Her footsteps echoed in my mind even after I woke up. The next evening, I decided to investigate. My gut told me to leave it alone, but curiosity won. I needed answers. I left my apartment and crossed the alley to the neighboring house. Up close, it looked abandoned, chipped paint, overgrown weeds, windows dusty and opaque. But her window was clean, almost polished, inviting. My heart pounded harder with each step. My heart pounded as I knocked. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Silence. The house loomed over me, its walls swallowing the sound of my pounding fist. The longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was being watched, not just by her, but by something else, something unseen. I tried the door. It creaked open, revealing a stale darkness beyond. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something rotten. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a hushed click, a whisper of a sound that made my breath hitch in my throat. The house was empty, furniture draped in white sheets, floors coated in dust, no signs of recent living. My stomach twisted. I walked up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder, thick with the weight of something unspoken. I reached the room where I had seen her, and my breath hitched. The room was bare. No furniture, no mannequin, no woman, just silence. But the window was open. A breeze stirred the dust, sending tiny particles swirling through the air like disturbed ghosts. Then, a sound behind me, a soft creak, a whisper of movement in the silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. I spun around. The door was closing. And standing in the hallway was the woman, her head tilted unnaturally to one side, eyes still locked onto mine, unmoving, unblinking. Her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, as if preparing to reach for me. A slow, jerky movement, like something unused to controlling its own body. I didn't have time to scream before the lights went out. A sound filled the darkness, a scraping noise, like nails dragging along the walls. Closer, closer. A breath that wasn't mine echoed in the void. I turned to run, but something grabbed me, cold, skeletal fingers tightening around my wrist. And then, everything went silent. The silence that followed was suffocating. My breath hitched, my pulse a deafening drumbeat in my ears. The grip on my wrist tightened, nails pressing into my skin like tiny knives. I wrenched my arm back, stumbling in the darkness. The presence in front of me exuded a chilling force, something old, something dead. A whisper slithered through the air, words I couldn't understand. My back hit the wall, heart hammering as a shadow loomed before me. The woman. But she wasn't just staring anymore. She was moving, jerking forward in uneven, unnatural motions, her limbs twisting as though she was learning how to walk. A guttural sound escaped her throat, something between a moan and a sob. The air grew colder, biting at my skin. I forced myself to move, shoving past her, my shoulder grazing something ice cold. I ran blindly, feeling my way down the hallway, but the darkness was thick, suffocating. The walls felt closer, the space narrowing around me. I reached out, fumbling, trying to find the stairs, the door, anything. Then I heard it. A dragging sound, slow, deliberate, the rasp of something sharp against the floorboards. I knew without looking she was following me. I reached the stairs and half threw myself down them, landing hard on the wooden floor below. Pain shot through my knee, but I pushed forward, scrambling toward the entrance. My hands found the doorknob, but I hadn't locked it. A whisper of laughter behind me. Close, too close. I spun around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. She stood at the top of the stairs, her body trembling, spasming like a marionette with tangled strings. Her head jerked unnaturally to one side, those lifeless, glassy eyes fixed on me. And then, slowly, she began descending, her feet barely touching the steps. I pounded on the door, slamming my fist against it. "Let me out! Let me out!" The laughter grew, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to come from all around me. My vision swam, panic tightening my chest. Then I saw it. A small table by the door, an old rusted key resting on top. I lunged for it, fumbling as my hands trembled. Behind me, the creaking grew louder, closer. I could feel her presence looming over me, that breathless whisper coiling around my ears. I shoved the key into the lock, twisting desperately. The door gave way, bursting open with a groan. Cold night air rushed in. I stumbled forward, crashing onto the pavement outside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound behind me stopped. Silence. Nothing but the soft hum of the city in the distance. I twisted around, expecting to see her in the doorway. But the house was empty. No shadow, no woman, just the dark interior gaping at me like an open maw. I didn't wait. I ran. By the time I reached my apartment, I was gasping for air, my mind spinning. I locked the door behind me, double-checking, triple-checking. I sat with my back to it, willing my body to stop shaking. Hours passed. The first light of dawn crept through the windows, and I started to believe maybe I was safe. Then my phone buzzed. A single message. No sender, no number. Just 3 words. Turn around. Now. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt colder, as if the air had thickened. My fingers trembled as I gripped the phone, unable to move, unable to even blink. The silence in the apartment stretched on, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't want to turn around. I knew what I would see. A shadow moved on the edge of my vision, a sliver of darkness just beyond the glow of my phone's screen. A slow, deliberate creak came from behind Metha, sound of weight shifting on wooden floorboards. My heartbeat pounded, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to do something, but I was frozen in place. The air felt charged, electric, with a presence that did not belong. Dimness of my apartment, scanning the room in terrified anticipation. And then I saw her, standing in the doorway of my bedroom, still, watching. Her head tilted in that same unnatural way, those lifeless eyes locked onto mine. But something was different. Her mouth was open wider now, lips stretched, jaw unhinged in an impossible angle. A scream built in my throat, but before I could let it out, the lights flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. A breath, close to my ear. The last thing I felt was finger-sized cold, skeletal fingers clamping down on my shoulders before the world went silent once more.